we had a couple more drinks, and within 48 hours, I was on a plane to Yekaterinburg, the main city in the Ural Mountains, where the Tsar was murdered back in 1917. And I had with me a raincoat, I had a fake fur hat, no gloves, and when I got off the plane, it was minus 28. Never been so cold in my life. Drinking in Russia is a very dangerous thing, they say, and I can certainly agree with that. I've had plenty of examples where I've been under the table, or post-genocidal, as they say out there. But there is one woman I met in Russia socially over a drink, and I've only met her 3 times socially in my life. And she has perhaps changed my life more than anybody else. The first time I met Margaret from Birmingham was in January 1993, and I ended up on a plane to the edge of Siberia. The second time I met her was in July 1994, and I ended up on a plane to Central Africa to post-genocidal Rwanda. And the third time I met her was 29 years later in Zagreb, and we had dinner with her and her family. And so the scene was, I was working for this laser crystals company I mentioned in the last chapter, and I was earning $60 a week. It was a fairly dead-end job. I wasn't really going anywhere, and I was looking for another challenge. And I went to a bar called Rosie O'Grady's. It was the only Irish pub in Moscow at the time, back in the early 90s. And I went for a drink with my friend Jerry, and we were having a few Guinnesses, and he introduced me to this girl, Margaret, who he knew through some contact at work. And after a few drinks, Margaret, was asking what I was doing. I said I was looking for a job. And so she asked me if I spoke Russian, which I did. And she asked me if I wouldn't mind living in some kind of shithole parts of the Soviet Union. And I said, totally fine. And she asked me if a salary of $1,500 plus accommodation plus food would be acceptable, which was almost 6 times what I was earning at the time. And we had a couple more drinks, and within 48 hours, I was on a plane to Yekaterinburg, the main city in the Ural Mountains, where the Tsar was murdered back in 1917. And I had with me a raincoat, I had a fake fur hat, no gloves, and when I got off the plane, it was minus 28. Never been so cold in my life. And I quickly got some gloves and better things to wear and so on. And my job was a job I'd actually had at primary school. I was a milk monitor, and the program was quite interesting. There was a lot of famine in the post-Soviet Russia. All the supply chains and distribution systems are broken down. There were a lot of people where, the inflation was high, everything was very, very expensive, and people just didn't have money to buy food. And so a lot of people were slaughtering their cows and actually eating the meat and so on. And so also in Yekaterinburg, it was a very, very industrial city. The Ural Mountains was very industrial. It was the industrial heartland of the Soviet Union. And there was a frightening statistic that 70% of Russian women couldn't lactate. And so it was decided to do an intervention with USAID to distribute milk powder to 3 main groups: pregnant women, large families with 3 or more children, or children under 3. And our job was to work with the local authorities to get the lists of these people. We did a pre-check. We physically went to visit 1-2% to make sure the lists were actually accurate. And then we set up the distribution process. And so my first day on the job, I was sent out to a town called Krasnoufimsk, which was somewhat west of Yekaterinburg. And it was described as the Switzerland of the Urals. And it was actually a closed town, and I hadn't actually had a foreigner visiting it before I came for at least 70, 80 years. And so when it was announced that this foreigner was coming, everybody was a little bit excited, and they decided to throw a banquet in my honor. When I heard about this, I tried to get it cancelled because I'm really not that kind of guy. But I was told this is a huge honor for the town to have this foreigner coming. And so my first day on the job, we went. Yana was my Russian interpreter, my colleague, and I had my driver, Mansour. And we drove in the Lada. And as we were coming into Krasnoufimsk, I noticed on the right-hand side, they had a brewery. And I was quite excited. And I mentioned to Yana, it'd be great to go to a town with beer. I'm quite interested to try the local beer. And she said, okay, no problem. When we got to the banquet, it was very, very ornate. And they had really gone out of their way to make me feel very welcome. The food was just dripping. It was caviar. There was just food dripping off the thing. And of course, lots and lots of toasts. And so the first toast was to English-Russian friendship. And the tradition in Russia, as I'm sure you know, is you would drink 100 gram or like 100 grams of vodka straight down. And then you would have like a pickled gherkin or maybe a bit of bread just to as a sort of chaser. And then you would have another toast to Margaret Thatcher, to Winston Churchill, to beautiful Russian women to beautiful English women to our children to our future. And very, very quickly, I could see that where this evening was going, and it was going rapidly south, and I could feel myself slipping once more under the table. And then they brought out the Azerbaijani champagne, they brought out the Georgian wine, they brought out the Armenian brandy, and everyone was very jolly. There was perhaps 15 to 16 people at the table. Everything was going well. My Russian was good enough, so we were having good conversations. And then Yana said, Paul, if it's possible, would like to have a beer because he's a real beer fan. And we noticed that you had this beer factory on the edge of town. Silence. The whole room just sort of froze. You could hear a pin drop. And I said, no, it's fine. Honestly, this is wonderful. I don't need to have a beer. And they said, unfortunately, there is no beer in this town, even though we have our own brewery because of the distribution system. This is very, very shameful to us if you're a beer lover especially. And so don't worry, tomorrow morning, we will rectify this, and 10 o'clock you have a gap in your schedule, and we will have a visit to the brewery, and we'll give a tour, and you can taste the beer and everything. And I said, honestly, it's fine. And they said, no, we insist. So I don't remember going to bed. I was totally and utterly drunk, and this is my first day on the job. Yana woke me up in the morning, and I felt like a camel had shat in my mouth. I felt, honestly. And the first thing that we had to do in the morning was go and visit a dairy and go and inspect the milk production facility, which was like the last thing you want to do on a hangover. But I managed to get through it, and that was at 9 o'clock. And then I said, okay, let me just die, please. Let's go back. I can't cope anymore. And they said, no, you have to go 10 o'clock to the brewery. Everyone's expecting you. And I said, I really, really can't face alcohol this morning. And they said, no, you are the guest of honor. You are expected and you have to be there. And so I went, and it was extraordinary. It was absolutely extraordinary. The director of this brewery in this remote part of Russia was German. His father had been a prisoner of war, caught in 1942 or something, and married a local girl and so on. And because Germany had a beer making tradition, his son ended up running the brewery. And so we had this German producing beer. The production facility was like something I've never seen before. So you had this sort of semi-automated plant where you would have all the bottles coming around, and then there'd be somebody who would be hand putting on the labels. And then the machine would stick them. And then you had somebody else who was manually putting the caps on the bottles, and then the machine would come down. But there was this one woman, and she was watching all the bottles like this. And I couldn't figure out what she was doing. And after about 5 minutes, she just pulled the bottle out like this and was looking. Another 2 minutes, she pulled another bottle like this. And the first one had just a little bit too little beer below the neck, and this one had a bit too much. And so she just topped it up to even it out, and then she just put it back on. And that was her job, 6 days a week or 5 days a week, however long she worked. And so then we went to the director's office to have a chat and so on. And there were, I think, 5 local representatives. There was Yana, who was looking really sick. There was my driver, who was looking really sick. And they came in and they literally brought in a bucket of beer and put it on the coffee table. And then they brought in like these pint glasses, and they said, okay, so who wants a beer? And, my driver said, sorry, I'm driving. And Yana says, no, I'm a lady. I don't drink beer. And the next guy said, sorry, I have a meeting now with the mayor. I can't possibly have a drink. And so around it came to me, and I really didn't want a drink, but I realized that I had to. So I just picked up a pint glass and I sort of delved it out like this and started drinking it. And I mean, talk about hair of the dog. I just about got through the pint, and then they encouraged me to have more. And then they were trying to bring out the Azerbaijani champagne, and I'm just, please. I thanked them for their wonderful, wonderful hospitality, because it was. And then I said, okay, we just need to go. I have an urgent meeting back in Yekaterinburg. I have to get back. And so they gave us 3 cases of beer, which we put in the back of the Lada in the boot. And I literally lay on the back seat, and I just passed out for the 3-hour drive back to Yekaterinburg. And my boss looked at me as I came in, and he's like, what the hell happened to you? This is just your first day. And that was what humanitarian aid in Russia was like in 1993. It was a baptism of fire.